Goed, goeiemiddag studente en welkom by die eerste lesing vir ENGT421. Dit is dan ook die laaste module wat julle in die onderrig van Engels sal doen as deel van julle graadstudie. Ek kan amper nie glo ons trek al so ver nie. Ek hoop elkeen van julle is veilig en gesond. Dit wil vir my lyk as die virus nou op sy ernstige fase begin hier in Suid-Afrika, so moet asseblief nie kans vat nie. Hou jouself weg van gevaar. Goed, wat die assesseringsrooster betref, jou eerste E-klas toets moet jy teen week 4 doen. Ons gaan eers hierdie studie-eenheid afhandel wat ons vandag mee begin. Hy gaan in 2 dele gedeel word. Dan kan jy ook kyk na jou semester opdrag daar, week 9, wat hy moet inwees. Ons sal hom later 'n bietjie meer bespreek, maar dit gaan daaroor dat jy 'n volledige 2 weke beplanning moet doen. Ons gaan dit indirek vir iets anders ook gebruik, wat ek dan volgende sal bespreek na hierdie skyfie. Die kontakbesonderhede bly dieselfde, onthou asseblief, ek sien nou ek het 'n fout daar gemaak, mevrou Bischoff se adres vir hierdie module sal 421 wees en nie 411 wees nie. Goeders wat dringend is, wat jy dadelik 'n antwoord vir soek, en ek weet, party van julle ten spyte van die feit dat julle 4 jaar is, besef dit nog steeds nie, stuur vir my 'n e-pos. As dit dringend of nie dringend is nie en jy kan 'n dag of 2 wag, stuur vir mevrou Bischoff 'n e-pos. Dan wil ek in die volgende skyfie wil ek net gou vir julle terugverwys na julle studiebrief toe en net gou kyk wat hierdie ding doen. Hy gaan nog aan na julle studiebrief toe en spesifiek as ek dit nou hier kry, verwys ek na nou vir julle wys na hierdie stuk. Is hy nou verwys spesifiek na daai stuk. Ok, jy sal sien op bladsy 6 van jou jaarboek, of het nou die een was toe jy in 2017 in eerste jaar was, op die een vir hierdie jaar, staan daar spesifiek van 'n taalendossement. 'n taalendossement bepaal of jy kan Engels gee in 'n bepaalde taal. Ons neem aan jy kan dit doen in Afrikaans, omdat jy Afrikaans huistaal onderrig gekry het. Maar jy moet 'n bepaalde punt hê om te kan sê jy kan in Engels ook onderrig gee. Nou ek moet vir julle sê, ek twyfel nie dat enige een van julle daarmee sal sukkel nie, maar ongelukkig moet ons die protokol volg en dit volgens 'n punt uitwerk. Nou hierdie punt gaan bestaan uit die finale punte van 3 van jou modules. As ek reg onthou was dit 311, 321 en 411. Daai punt word in 3 gedeel, plus dan 'n mondeling wat onder 421 geskied. Die mondeling het eintlik niks spesifiek met 421 te doen nie. 421 is net die laaste module wat gegee word en dis gebruik ons dit daarvoor. Ek het 2 vliee met 1 klap doodgekry deur jou semesteropdrag vir gedeelte daarvan te gebruik waarop hierdie mondeling gebaseer gaan word. Een van die lesse wat jy in jou 2 weke siklus gaan plan, gaan jy gebruik vir hierdie mondeling. Hierdie punt wat jy dan kry, het net te doen met jou taalendossement. Dit het niks met jou semesterpunt te doen nie. Jou semesteropdrag word in week 9 ingegee. Ek beplan dat jy dan van daaraf dit begin doen. Nou die aanvanklike plan was dat jy in sou kom Aros toe op 'n bepaalde middag en jy sou 'n les vir my kom aanbied. Maar soos wat julle weet is dit nou nie moontlik nie. So ons gaan dan moet oorskakel na 'n video toe waar jy jouself gaan opneem en dan vir my die video instuur. Ek sal vir jou 'n bepaalde rubriek voor die tyd gee. Jy hoef dit nie voor 'n klas te doen nie. Jy kan net vir my een van jou lesse wat jy beplan het in jou semesteropdrag kom aanbied. Goed, so dit is wat dit betref. Ek sal later in die semester meer breedvoerig daaroor uitwy en ek wil hê julle moet asseblief daarop aandag ook gee. As jy onseker is oor wat ek nou net gesê het, vra my gerus. Okay, the next thing we're going to discuss in this lesson is the teaching of listening and speaking. We're focusing specifically on the teaching of listening, and we're doing speaking in the next contact session. Let's quickly have a look at the assessment criteria, what you should be able to do after this lesson. Firstly, outline issues associated with the teaching of listening and speaking skills to English first additional language learners. To categorize various approaches and contents to teaching listening skills. You also have to identify strategies for helping learners improve their spoken English. And then distinguish between various challenges faced by non-home language speakers of English with regards to pronunciation, and compile suitable assessment for teaching listening and speaking skills at an English first additional language level. Okay, as I said, we're going to focus specifically on listening. I asked you to watch a couple of videos before the time on ear class, and then there's also one which shows you 10 listening teaching games or techniques that you can go and watch afterwards. Okay, let's have a look at the introduction. Now, I said it might be so, not it might be so. It often is the case that listening and speaking is the neglected skill of the 4 skills proposed by CAPS. I, for one, can attest to that. I find it often very difficult when I taught intermediate phase to try and integrate or try and use the skill on its own. It's often taken for granted by educators because they reason that it's integrated as part of the other skills. This to a certain extent is true, okay, but it cannot stand as fact, especially when it gets to the first additional language learner. It is not as obvious as the above. Remember, and you will learn now, I know you've got Sepedi, and then you can also think back when we learned in 211 that speaking in another language learning to speak another language is much easier when you are younger than when you are older, because it involves a range of sub-skills: content, morphosyntax, lexis, discourse, information structuring, and appropriate register. So it is not as easy as we who are often native speakers of this language might think. We as teachers cannot ignore this. Okay, we have to address this, because if you think about it, all the learners start to learn a language by speaking it, not by writing it, speaking it specifically. We are also within the South African context, so there are many different home languages, often not entirely applicable to use as a foundation to teach listening to. Okay, let's specifically now look at listening itself. Okay, it's an active process. We know it composes meaning because it's a part of a communicative unit, and it involves interpretation of incoming sounds and often feedback as well through speaking. Okay, we can also say it's a message that is heard and the sounds are recognized and interpreted. What did this video that we watched tell us? Okay, firstly, it told us that there are particular problems that arise with first additional language learners because they are not always familiar with certain words and syntax. Okay, and the abilities from one learner to the next might vary. Okay, this may depend on home circumstances, socioeconomic situation, education levels of parents or their caregivers. Okay, and of course then very applicable to the South African situation, the differences in culture. Keep that in mind when you ask learners to listen. It also told us the following about problems that first additional language learners might have. They might struggle to pick up the phonemic nuances of the language. If you think back to how the lady illustrated this spoken language versus formal language, native English speakers often swallow, or it appears as if they swallow some words, they don't pronounce them fully. This can often then result in anxiety because the learner doesn't necessarily understand. The pace is too fast to listen to. The whole caboodle starts imploding because processing takes too long and the rest of the message goes lost. There's too much information, and this results in a lack of concentration because of the fatigue caused by concentrating the whole time. I just want to remind you again of the different types of listening you get. Discriminative listening, we learned this in 211. Where the learner specifically listens to specific phonemes, in other words, specific sounds, and there's not necessarily a meaning process involved, simply the identification of sounds. Whereas with comprehensive listening, the meaning is involved. The learner wants to make meaning, or the listener wants to make meaning. This often happens when the teachers teach and the learners have to listen. They basically have to differentiate sounds the whole time. Number 3, critical listening, listening to give feedback, to make a judgment. Number 4, appreciated listening, listening for enjoyment. Number 6, therapeutic listening, typically the type of listening that a health professional like a psychologist, a counselor, social workers, or EMS personnel might practice. They listen mostly and give very little response. Okay, they are trying to get behind a perceived problem. Then you also have creative listening. Okay, listening involving emotion, where visualization needs to take place. Okay, that's a very useful to us as intermediate phase teachers, because this allows us to let the child listen and then give a picture of what they see in their heads through interpretation of what they listen to as well. Okay, let's move on to the different approaches to teaching and improving listening. Okay, keep in mind that I've given you that video at the end of the lesson where that guy with that sounds like he's South African, but he's got a funny accent with his class, gives you a couple of listening games and tips. Use this in conjunction with that. Okay, I almost want to say that through experience now, a listening activity should be standard at the start of every lesson. Whether the focus is on listening and speaking or whether it's on something else, start the lesson off with a listening activity, because you very quickly get a feeling of what's going on in the class. Firstly, your learners need to be calm before you can do that. They need to, their attention needs to be with you. So there's an element of discipline involved as well. And secondly, you need to keep them, entertain is perhaps the wrong word, but you need to keep them, what you're saying, relevant, to link this with their private knowledge. These days, technology is probably the first thing we go to. That's fine, but don't discard things like visuals and question previews as well. How do we enhance these listening skills? Okay, keep in mind your context, the learner sitting in front of you, different levels of development and acquisition of English. It's therefore important that you make the activity relevant to all the learners, irrespective of their background and age. And then you need to check the appropriateness of the text as well, if the learner starts showing signs of boredom. Importantly also, there needs to be no harm in the text. In other words, something shouldn't be over their age or contain any stereotype or offend anyone. Okay, although that is very relative in these times that we live in as well. But the important thing is go with boredom. So the thing is to keep learners actively engaged the whole time. Let those ears be used for what they were created for. We can classify these activities into different types of responses. You get one where there's no overt response. The key here, if you look at the activities, for example, of story reading, songs, films, and theatre, is not to make the activity too long, because the learner might be interested in what they hear, but they might get bored or fall asleep or whatever because of the monotony of a tone of voice or anything like that. Short responses could be something where the learner has to give feedback, not necessarily spoken feedback, where they can tick off items on the list, listen for specific words, respond to true and false questions, mistakes, verbal quizzes, things like that. Longer responses, again, keep boredom or keeping attention spans in mind. Question answering, note taking, paraphrasing, translation, and summarizing. This is typically something you'll do with, for example, a listening comprehension. Okay, if we move on, keep in mind that in the intermediate phase, children still have a sense of adventure and of competition. Try and make these listening activities like a game. Refer back to that video even after you've completed your qualification. Refer back to that video I've given you. They are very easy and easy to do games around that can make your listening lesson very successful. Must be active. Remember, you can use the TPR method, the total physical recall, where learners have to listen but they have to move as well, and learning is much better through the right brain because they associate that they're learning with the movement. At the same time, it does also say that you can rather use written responses from learners as opposed to individual spoken responses, because it ensures that the learners throughout the class are kept busy. Okay, so that's very important, and that you don't have to or that learners don't respond one by one and then other learners lose focus. Okay, test their responses by giving step instructions where they have to make something, where they need to give feedback, and while the learners carry out the instruction. The physical response, I said, is a good idea because they're also at the age where they need to physically move with all kinds of conditions like ADHD and simply not being able to sit still. So use this to your advantage and teach in that way. If the teacher wants the learner to listen to a reading text, it's important not to have for them to have that text in front of you. Think how very quickly, when you work from a textbook and you ask learners to a page in that textbook, how quickly you lose the focus of many of the learners, because it's predictable. They can see what's going on there, and they lose focus very quickly. So that let them not have the text in front of them. At the same time, you can go and have a look at some of your other 211 teaching approaches. I'm not sure what it was called, communicative. In any case, it means learners learn a new language by using it in real life situations. You can use this to your advantage as well. Let them listen to radio and television news, for example, even as an assessment. Okay, something like commentary on sports that the learners associated with theatre shows. I've recently reviewed a grade R guide where they show you step-by-step steps on how to make hand puppets. Phone conversations where you can bring in speaking, where learners sit against each other and they have to communicate with each other over a phone. And then conversation associated with meetings, typically things that you find in meetings. The reenactment of a shopping trip, public announcement messages like that you find at an airport for a bus service or train stations, not rain stations. You can use that as well. Okay, students, finally, to end off this lesson, I'd like to show you a small exercise in word stress that you can use learners to listen to, and which they can improve their vocabulary and improve their listening skills as well. Just for instance sake, stressed words are known as tonic words. My example sentence there is all 15 members of the team can play in any type of weather. Okay, now remember, by putting the stress on various parts of the sentence, we can change the meaning. Tell this to the learners when you discuss it with them. Let's have a look at the first example then. If my stress is on the following, there's one meaning. So I can say all 15 members of the team can play in any type of weather. So my stress is on all 15 members of the team. I can also read the sentence as follows. All 15 members of the team can play in any type of weather. Or I can read it as all 15 members of the team can play in any type of weather. And then lastly, perhaps not as obvious, all 15 members of the team can play in any type of weather. My stress is there on weather. Ask the learners how meaning is changed. Okay, students, this will be the end of our lesson at this stage. We've got a little bit of time left, but I'd like to start speaking afresh and give enough time for it as one lesson. I wish you well for the start of your semester. Keep safe, study hard. You are nearly done. Moenie nou die bal laat val nie asseblief. Goed gaan julle.